Hi, my YouTube friends. It's Leela. I thought you might get tired of looking at my hands since I'm not crafting anything in this video, so I thought I would come to you face to face. So recently I shared with you some of my writing tips and tricks for the writing process, and a lot of you expressed a lot of interest in seeing what I do before the writing is getting done. Before I'm actually in the process of writing a story, what's the stuff that I do, the notes and the things, to get that story kind of moving in the direction of actually writing it. So a lot of the pre-writing process is about keeping your eyes and ears open. So you have to, listen and look and let your imagination kind of run away with things. Like if you hear a snippet of conversation in the hallway, you can make up what happens after you leave the hallway. Or if you are driving down the road and you see this woman who looks really agitated and she's on her phone waiting at the crosswalk for the light to turn, what is she on the phone about? You don't actually have to know the reality of it to make up a story about it, and nobody has to know that you're doing it in your head. You never have to tell anyone. So make it up, and then if you want to, write it down. And you might feel really weird at first. I get it, making up stories about people and writing them down. I've been there. It can be weird. But again, nobody has to know except you and anybody that you tell, so don't tell anybody. Sometimes that can be just a fun exercise to keep your mind going, to train yourself to listen to your imagination, because it makes things up all the time, only most people don't notice because we either are trained not to, or it's just not a high priority. It's not something that people remind you to do. So sometimes it can be a fun exercise just to listen and look and make up stories about what you see and hear. But sometimes those things can spark a story. And, sometimes you'll hear this tiny turn of phrase or a word or the tone of somebody's voice, and your brain will start doing this. And it's really cool because that's where stories come from. I mean, they come from everywhere. And, one of the questions that any author gets is, where do you get your stories? They're everywhere. I promise. Pinky swear. So once you have a spark, something you really want to write about, something you really feel that could become a story, that's when you start taking notes. And I use a mix of digital and analog to take my notes. Evernote is a huge help because it lets me categorize things so that ideas are grouped and fast to access. So if you're not familiar with how Evernote works, I'll kind of do a quick walkthrough with you, but I'm going to leave a link below, and I think they've got tutorials and stuff. But if not, I don't know, maybe my walkthrough will help. Basically how it works is that you can make notebooks and you can make tags. So I've got a notebook, for example, for, there's an automatic notebook that has all notes, and then I've got one for story bits and bobs, right? So that's just the little snippets. That's where I keep the notes on things that caught my ear, things that caught my eye, things that I might want to develop, a turn of phrase, something that came up in my head that I don't want to let go of. That's where, bits and bobs is where that goes. And then I've got a notebook called Story Ideas, and that's when one of those bits grows into a story idea. And sometimes I get them a little more fully formed than a bit or a bob, and at that point they're just a story idea. Those go in story ideas. And then as I work on those, or as I think more about them, I just let them sit back here and percolate. At that point, I will put anything with relation to those into story notes. But within those notebooks, I can tag them. So let's say I have a story idea about, I don't know, a fairy queen, right? Let's just throw that out there because I write fantasy, that's easy. Let's say I have a story idea about a fairy queen. I can tag any of the bits and bobs about her with fairy queen. I can tag any of the story notes about her, and I can tag any of the story ideas. So if I'm in the all notes thing and I want to see everything about the fairy queen, I click on that tag and everything in all of the notebooks will come up associated with that tag. So it's really cool. And one of the other things I like about Evernote is that it's got a really robust mobile application. So I've got this little bar here, and then I've got this, which are just the latest ideas, I think, or I forget how this is set up. But then this top one here on the next screen is bits and bobs, and this one here is the recently updated. So this is the most recent stuff. And you can put in photos, I have a free account, so I can't put in that many photos, but I haven't found the need to upgrade to a paid account yet. It works for me as is. So that's a really cool tool that I like to use. But I also write by hand every day. And a lot of that writing is musings about story ideas. Some of it is journaling, some of it is planning. But a lot of it is about story ideas and what I would do with them and where they would go. And, you know, if this happens, then that. And what's the relationship between these two characters? And what's the reason that this character is doing the things that they're doing? What's the backstory? What's the driving force? And it doesn't all necessarily come together at once. A lot of times it kind of has to sit. And a lot of times it'll go through a lot of revisions and reimaginations before I arrive at what the final story actually is. So a lot of times I will do this on paper, but I also have a 4 foot by 6 foot, well, 6 foot by 4 foot chalkboard, which you guys may have seen on my Instagram, which I'll put my username below if you're not following me, and you can if you want, which would be great to see you. So I have a 4 by 6, 6 by 4, whatever, chalkboard that I use, that is just, it's amazing. Like, especially if I'm starting a new story and I really want to map out everything that's happening, the chalkboard is great. But not everybody has a humongous chalkboard. I mean, you can get a marker board, and actually, if you go to a hardware store and you go into their like lumber and whatever department towards the back there, you can get, I think it's called wallboard. And I learned this from a design agency that I've worked with through my actual job. If you buy wallboard, and you can have the store generally cut it, but you can get like a humongous whiteboard that's actually really good quality. It doesn't have a frame or a ledge or anything, but it's really good whiteboard. And it's, I think, white wallboard, and it's like, it's mind-blowing. But I prefer the chalkboard. I prefer the feel of a chalkboard. I prefer the non-toxic smells of a chalkboard. And I'm lucky enough to have one, so that's what I use. But you can do this on paper too. And I'm going to show you actually one of my notebooks from the first novel that I wrote, so you can kind of get a little bit of a feeling for how that looks on paper. Okay, so this is the notebook that I was writing in at the time that I was creating my first novel. And this is just a Moleskine, a large, extra large soft cover, which I collaged because I like to do that with my notebooks. So for example, I created something on paper called the idea room. So you can kind of see here, and I put little boxes, just random size. There was no rhyme or reason to why I did them that way, but I put little boxes, and then I would put an idea the size of the box in the box. And that was kind of a cool way for me to start exploring the story, because I was stuck. I didn't know what to do, and then I was like, well, let me try it in a different shape, and maybe that will kind of let my mind think about it in a different way. And it worked. So maybe it'll work for you if you're not sure how to get started. And then in between there's just pages of regular notes. And then this page is actually a double page spread of the same kind of thing. I just made boxes and I filled the boxes with ideas. And a lot of these ideas didn't make it into the final book, but they were necessary to help me get to where the book had to go. So that's kind of how you can do it on paper. You can do it in a small format, large format, however it works for you. If that's a tool that you think would work for you, doesn't matter. The important thing is that you're getting it down, you're working it through, you know, letting it start to develop. And once I do mapping, after that, it's just kind of, or once, even if it's not a formal mapping and I'm just starting to ask questions, but you just have to let it ferment. It's kind of like really good kimchi, like you just have to leave it and let it sit in your brain, and it's going to do all these chemical things in your brain while you're not looking. And then, you know, eventually you'll start to organically come to a point, and you have to ask yourself questions. You can't just be like, oh, I have this idea, and then sit on it and not think about it at all. That's not the same thing. This is, you know, you're thinking about it, you're kind of chewing on it a little bit, you're, think about it like if you, and for all you paper nerds, I know you'll feel me, especially my planner people, there's a set of stickers that you really want, right? You're like desperate for these stickers, but you don't want to spend the money, but you can't stop thinking about it. But yeah, you're going to just go live your life. You know what? Because it's a no spend month. You're going to live your life. But yeah, I could go back and bookmark it and buy it at the end of my no spend month. Your story ideas have to do that. You always have to go back to them, even if it's just for a couple of minutes every day, a couple of seconds, just always let them be just on the edge of whatever it is that you're thinking. That's more of a mindful development of a story idea rather than just being like, oh, I have this really cool idea, and then never letting it come out again. That's not the same thing as letting it ferment and percolate. So eventually you'll come to a point where a lot of your questions are answered. A lot of your character arcs will start to become clear. A lot of your plot points will sort of gel a little bit. And that's where the other writing process stuff comes in. And that's the point at which you start setting realistic goals. You start writing every day. You kind of let your story develop. And as you're writing it, as your word count grows, that's when it's important to be listening to your characters. And we talked about that. That was the 4th step in my other writing video. Listen to your characters, because a lot of times, even if you thought you had your story exactly, here's where it is, here's where it needs to go, I've got steps A through Z completely taken care of, and nobody is going to say anything to me to make me change my mind, sometimes your characters will. And every time that it's happened to me, the story has actually been better. It's been better connected, it's been more fleshed out. So, and again, it sounds really weird, but it's a part of, it's not that your characters are talking to you, it's the part of your brain where your character lives. And that part of your brain is saying, here's a connection you didn't think of, let me help you. And it works. I mean, so keep yourself open to that and listen for it. Because even if you thought it was set in stone, if you're willing to take that journey, even if it's not what you thought it would be, sometimes it might be better. And even if you don't love what you came up with, you can always edit and fix it. And, one thing that I've lived by since I started writing is that if you don't like what you did or if it doesn't work, you can edit it. But if you don't write it, you can't edit what doesn't exist. You can't make better nothing. So you have to have something in order to make it better. And sometimes having something is the hardest part, just getting yourself to get that something, whatever it is, out there. And this goes for anything creative. If you're knitting, if you're painting, if you're sewing, if you're, whatever. Sometimes it's hard to get it out there. But once you do, you can learn, you can get better. And, at least with writing, you can fix the things that you didn't like. Knitting probably a little bit harder, but I'm not a knitter, so I don't actually know how that works. Tried it. I was not very good. So at this point, you might be thinking, all right, well, what if I don't have all these ideas banging down the door waiting for me to write them? My answer to that would be, you do. Like I said before, ideas are everywhere. And the only difference between a person who doesn't write and a person who does is that the person who does write notices them, and they're listening, and they're watching, and they're letting it all meld together in this delightful mind soup of story time. And, for every one story that swims, 10 are going to sink, 15. I mean, it's kind of like taking a photo where you take 100 photos and 99 of them are terrible, and one of them is like the prettiest thing you've ever seen. Same kind of thing. Not every idea is going to survive. Not every idea is going to be the one for you. I mean, you can't write everything, but the ones that are the right ones will stick, and you'll get more sticking of ideas the more you learn to listen. And just like anything else, it gets better with practice. So the more you listen, the more you're letting things start to percolate. The more that happens, the more you've got going on. Your brain is working in whole new ways, and then it's easier to pick up the new things, and then you start making connections. It's really cool. It's really cool. I imagine if you could feel it in your brain, it would be fizzy. Unfortunately, you can't feel it. But if you could, I'm betting on fizz. And it can be hard to get started, and I know that. I've been there. But that's kind of how you start. Listen and watch and let your mind play. And for those of you who need this, and I needed this too, you have permission. You have permission to let your mind play. I'm giving it to you. So if your mind is like, no, I don't have time for this, you tell your mind that I gave you permission. End of story. Let your mind play. That's where it all comes from. That's true for any artistic pursuit. Let it go. Let it play. The more you put into the world, the more faith you put into the world that you can do this creative thing, the universe is going to return that. So get started, and it can only grow from there. Or if it doesn't, maybe it's not the right thing for you to be doing, and you should, try focusing elsewhere. But if you want to try it, that's where you start. Listen, watch, let your mind play with it. So I hope that this has been helpful. I know that a lot of you were interested in the pre-writing process. Sorry, it's a little wordy, but I'm really excited to share this with you, and I hope that it's helpful. If you are going to start writing, or if you're blogging or whatever, or if you're going to start some other artistic pursuit and this has come in handy, please let me know in the comments below. I'm so excited to share this with you. I'm glad to have you here on my YouTube channel, and I will see you again next time. Bye. My camera is totally shaking.